The first time a stranger told me my husband had done something to her too, I was standing outside a pharmacy on Bardstown Road with a paper bag of shampoo, toothpaste, and cough drops pressed against my hip, thinking about whether Evan would still be awake when I got home. It was an ordinary Thursday in the kind of way that makes a life feel safe if you do not look too hard at it. I had stayed late at the clinic because one of our patients started crying halfway through her paperwork and then apologized for crying, which is something women do so often it barely sounds strange anymore. By the time I left, the sky had gone that flat gray Louisville gets in early spring when the air feels damp even if it is not quite raining. I remember that because I was already tired, already halfway inside my own evening, and I almost missed the fact that the woman had been watching me. She was standing near the newspaper box by the curb, maybe mid-30s, dark coat, hair pulled back too loosely like she had fixed it in a hurry. Not dramatic looking, not wild-eyed. If anything, she looked like the kind of woman people don't notice because she had spent a long time learning how not to make herself noticeable. At first, I thought she was going to ask for directions. Instead, she stepped just close enough to make me stop, looked at my face with a strange, searching kind of certainty, and said, "You're Hannah, right?" The paper bag shifted in my arms. Yes, her eyes changed then. Not softer, sadder. "Your husband is Evan Pierce." I felt my stomach tighten so quickly it was almost embarrassing. "Why?" She glanced over my shoulder toward the street, then back at me, "Because I needed to be sure. I should have walked away, I know that now. Or maybe I should have asked more questions immediately, louder, sharper, something that would have made the moment hold still. But I did what I usually did when something felt off. I tried to understand it first." She leaned in just enough that no one else could have heard her and said very quietly, "He did this to me too." Then she stepped back. I stared at her. What did he do? But she was already shaking her head, not dismissive, not cruel. Like someone refusing to rip open more than she thought I could carry on a sidewalk at 6:30 in the evening. "You'll see it," she said. "You probably already do." And then she turned and crossed the street before I could stop her. I did not chase her. I stood there with cough drops digging into my forearm and watched traffic slide between us until she disappeared past a row of parked cars and a coffee shop window streaked with reflections. My first thought was the most obvious one: an affair, some old girlfriend. Some woman who had found out he was married and decided I deserved to know. But even in the first minute, that explanation did not fit the way she had said it. He did this to me too. Not I was with him too. Not he lied to both of us. Not ask him about me. This. By the time I got to our apartment building, I had replayed her face so many times it no longer felt like a face. It felt like evidence I did not know how to read. Mrs. Porter from 3B was in the lobby checking her mail. She looked up and smiled at me, then tilted her head in that gentle older lady way that sometimes felt comforting and sometimes felt invasive. "You all right, honey?" I adjusted the paper bag higher against my chest. "Long day." She nodded, but not fully, like she had heard the answer and also heard the space around it. "Well, get some rest." When I opened the apartment door, Evan was in the kitchen with his shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, stirring something in a skillet. The whole place smelled like garlic and butter and rosemary. Home, normal, thoughtful, everything I had taught myself to trust. He turned when he heard me. "Hey." He smiled and came over to kiss my cheek before taking the bag from my hands. "You look wiped out." There was nothing wrong with that sentence. A husband noticing his wife looked tired after work. That was all. But I heard it differently now. Not, "You look upset." Not, "Is something wrong?" Just the conclusion already placed in my mouth for me. "I'm okay," I said. "Clinic rough today?" he asked, setting the pharmacy bag on the counter. "You've seemed pretty overloaded this week." Overloaded. I had heard him use that word before. About me, to me, around me. Not meanly. Never in a way I could point to and say there that was the moment. He used words like a man laying down clean towels. Helpful. Anticipatory. Hard to argue with without sounding ungrateful. "Not overloaded," I said more sharply than I intended. "Just late." He glanced at me and I saw the pause. Small, clean, barely there. Then he smiled again. "Okay, late." He went back to the stove. I stood by the kitchen island taking off my coat and watching the side of his face like it might rearrange itself if I looked long enough. This was how our first year had worked from the outside. He made coffee before I woke up, kept my car full of gas, texted around lunch to remind me to eat if I had back-to-back patient intake all afternoon. He remembered stupid little details like the only yogurt brand I liked and how I hated when towels were folded in thirds instead of halves, because it made the linen closet look cramped. He was attentive in ways that sounded like love when I described them out loud. I had loved describing them out loud, because I'd grown up around women who did not get steadiness. My mother had spent half my life apologizing for men who were just under pressure or not good at expressing themselves or trying in their own way. I had promised myself I would not build my adult life around excuses. So when Evan came along with his calm voice and thoughtful habits, and that almost old-fashioned patience, I did not just fall in love with him. I believed I'd finally made a good decision. The harder truth was that there had always been moments I could not place. Small ones, like the time at dinner with friends when I started telling a story about a patient and Evan cut in smiling. Hannah gets the timeline mixed up when she's tired, and everybody laughed lightly because he said it lightly, and I laughed too even though I had not gotten the timeline mixed up. Or the Saturday morning I got quiet because I was upset about something his sister Denise had said to me, and he touched my wrist and said, "Let's not do that thing where you spiral and assume the worst," so gently that I ended up apologizing for a reaction I'd not even had yet. Or the argument 3 months earlier when I told him he had embarrassed me by correcting me in front of friends, and by the end of the conversation he was sitting on the couch rubbing his forehead while I stood there telling him I knew he was only trying to help. That was the part I kept circling now. The way apologies bent. I changed into leggings and a sweatshirt, washed my hands, set the table. Evan talked about a client meeting and a traffic backup on I-64 and whether we should go see his sister next weekend. His voice was the same as always. Warm, measured, easy to live beside. I kept waiting for the stranger's sentence to feel absurd, for it to evaporate in the face of my real life. Instead, my real life kept making room for it. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from Marisol asking if I could cover 10 minutes of front desk for her in the morning while she called her son's school. I answered yes. Evan glanced up. Marisol again. Her kids got something going on at school. He nodded and cut another piece of chicken. You really need to stop taking on everybody else's mess when you're this stressed. I looked at him. I'm not stressed. He gave me that soft, patient look people probably found reassuring. Hannah. Just my name, but inside it was a whole verdict. I felt heat rise up my throat, sudden and humiliating. Why do you keep saying that? Saying what? That I'm stressed, or overloaded, or tired in some special way. I put my fork down carefully because my hand had started to shake. Why do you always talk like you know what I'm feeling before I say it? For the first time that night, something in his face went still. Then he leaned back in his chair, not angry. Concerned. Of course concerned. I'm not doing anything, he said. I'm paying attention to my wife. There it was again, the almost perfect answer. The one that made objection sound like ingratitude. I looked at the table between us, at the water rings on the wood, at the steam lifting off the green beans, at my own hands folded too tightly in my lap. Maybe if the woman had accused him of something bigger, uglier, simpler, I could have rejected it. But she had handed me something worse than an accusation. She had handed me a pattern-shaped hole, and now every small memory in my marriage was beginning to slide toward it. The next morning I got to the clinic 10 minutes early and found Marisol in the break room pouring burnt coffee into a paper cup. She looked up once and said, "You look awful." Normally I would have laughed. Instead I said, "Can I ask you something weird?" She set the coffee down immediately. Yeah. I did not tell her everything, not yet, just enough. A woman on the street, Evan's name, that sentence. Marisol listened without interrupting, which is one of the reasons I love her. When I finished, she exhaled through her nose and looked at me for a long second. "I don't know what she meant," she said carefully, "but I do know I've wanted to ask you before whether he always talks for you like that." My whole body went cold. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "Just little stuff. If we're all out somewhere and somebody asks you a question, he answers fast. Or he'll say you're wiped or you've had a long week before you've said 2 words. She saw my face and added quieter, "I figured maybe that was just your dynamic, but I noticed it." I stared at the terrible coffee machine behind her like it had done something to me personally. Noticed it. Outside me. Visible. That afternoon while I was entering insurance information at my desk, I remembered the woman's face again. Not angry, not jealous, not dramatic. You probably already do. By the time I drove home, the question that scared me most was no longer whether Evan had betrayed me with another woman. It was whether another woman had recognized from one look at my face the same kind of marriage she had already survived. And for the first time since I had met him, I knew one thing clearly. I could not ask Evan what she meant. Not yet. First, I had to find her. I found Leah 2 days later because I stopped pretending I was not looking. I checked the pharmacy again first. then the coffee shop across the street, then the little row of businesses on that block, like I was trying to retrace a misheard sentence. I felt stupid doing it, exposed. Like every normal person passing me on the sidewalk could somehow tell I was searching for proof that my marriage had shifted underneath me. What finally helped was Mrs. Porter. She was in the lobby Saturday morning in a blue fleece robe under her coat, carrying a tote bag full of library books and pears. She watched me miss my mailbox twice before she said, "You're either in love or in trouble." I let out a laugh that did not sound like mine. Maybe both. She studied me a moment longer, then said, "That woman who stopped you the other night came by asking which unit you were in." I didn't tell her, obviously, but I told her if she meant well she could leave her number. My heart kicked once hard. Mrs. Porter reached into her coat pocket and handed me a folded receipt. A number was written on the back in neat block print along with one name, Leah. I thanked her too quickly, went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the receipt for almost 10 minutes before I called. She didn't answer. She texted 20 minutes later, "Can meet tomorrow. Public place." We met at a coffee shop near Cherokee Park on Sunday afternoon. It was busy enough to feel safe but not loud enough to disappear inside. Leah was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table near the window with a paper cup in both hands. She looked almost exactly the way I remembered, except calmer now that I knew who she was. Or maybe not calmer. More prepared. I sat down across from her and said, "You need to tell me what you meant." She nodded once. "I know." There was no theatrical pause, no speech about how hard this was for her. That was the first reason I believed her. She looked at my face for half a second like she was measuring what I could absorb and said, "I'm not here to tell you he cheated on me while he was with you. He didn't, at least not that I know of." Some part of me loosened and tightened at the same time. "Then what did he do?" Leah set her cup down carefully. "He made me stop trusting the meaning of things while they were happening." I said nothing. "He never had to scream," she went on. "That's what made it so confusing. If I got hurt by something he said, he'd tell me I was hearing it through old wounds. If I got quiet, he'd ask why I was shutting him out. If I tried to explain, he'd slow the whole conversation down until I sounded emotional and he sounded reasonable." She gave a short, humorless smile. By the end, every fight became about how I reacted to what hurt me, not what hurt me in the first place. The air in the coffee shop felt suddenly too warm. Milk steaming, chairs scraping the floor, a toddler laughing somewhere behind me. Ordinary life continuing around a sentence I could not unknow. I asked, "How long were you together?" "Almost 2 years. "And you're sure it's the same thing?" "You saw me for 10 seconds. I saw your face when I said his name." The answer landed so cleanly I didn't know where to put it. Leah looked down at her hands for a moment. "I'm not saying every relationship problem is abuse. I'm not trying to hand you language you don't want. I'm saying I know what it looks like when a woman has been slowly trained to question her own read on the room." Something cold moved through me then because she was careful. She was not trying to recruit me into her story. She was protecting the shape of mine. I asked her for specifics. I needed them, not accusations. Structure. So she gave them to me. "He moved fast at the beginning," she said. "Not recklessly. Intentionally. He paid attention in a way that felt almost old-fashioned. He remembered details. He made himself useful. He listened hard when she talked about her family, her fears, the things that made her feel difficult or too much or easy to leave. Then later, when conflict started, those exact places would get touched in softer ways. He used to say, "I'm not your enemy, Leah, but you keep treating me like one," she said. I felt my fingers tighten around my cup. Evan had said to me 6 months into our marriage, "I don't know why you always hear me like I'm against you." Not the exact sentence. Close enough to make my stomach turn. Leah kept going. If she cried, he became grave and patient and slightly wounded by her lack of trust. If she got angry, he talked even more quietly until she heard herself getting louder and hated herself for it. If she brought up something that had embarrassed or hurt her, he would eventually say some version of, "I hate that your stress makes everything feel like an attack." I looked at her. He says that. I figured. I thought about the night he corrected me at dinner with friends and later told me he was just trying to keep the conversation on track because I'd had a long week. I thought about the Saturday morning he asked why I was spiraling before I had even raised my voice. I thought about the apology that somehow became mine every time. Leah said, "Did he ever talk to other people about how worried he was about you?" I went still. "I didn't know at first," she said. That was the worst part. By the time I started trying to explain what was happening, his sister already thought I was unstable. A couple of his friends thought I was exhausting him. He never said anything cruel. That's why it worked. He said he was worried. He said I seemed fragile. He said he was trying to help. I could barely feel the chair under me. What hurt was not just that I recognized pieces of my life in hers. It was that the pieces had once felt private, intimate, marriage-shaped. The kind of painful little patterns couples tell themselves they will outgrow if they just communicate better. Instead, they were recurring. Reusable. I asked her why she had not said more on the street. Because women don't need strangers detonating their lives in public, she said. And because if I told you too much, too fast, you might have needed to protect him before you could hear me. I looked out the window then because if I kept looking at her, I thought I might cry in a way I could not take back. When I got home, Evan was folding laundry on the couch. Mine, his, all of it in neat stacks on the coffee table. There was music playing low from his phone and the apartment smelled like lemon cleaner. Everything looked almost offensively decent. He smiled when he saw me. There you are. There was a softness to him that afternoon that would have once moved me. Now it made me alert. How was lunch with Marisol? He asked. I had told him I was meeting Marisol because I was not ready to invent lies and because some stubborn part of me still wanted to know what he would do if I stayed just 1 inch to the side of his expectations. It was fine. He nodded like he accepted that, but I saw the tiny pause before he said, "You seem far away lately." I set my keys down on the counter. "Do I a little?" He folded one of my sweaters with unnecessary care. "I know work can get inside your head. I just don't want you carrying everything alone if you're struggling." There it was again. Not what are you feeling? Not tell me what's wrong. The diagnosis before the conversation. I said I'm not struggling. He gave me a look I knew too well by then. Gentle, concerned, almost protective. A look that suggested reality could be kindly amended if I would just let him do it. "Okay," he said softly. "I just don't think you always realize how stressed you are until it spills over." My throat went tight, but not with doubt this time. With anger so contained it almost felt clean. That week I started keeping things in order for myself. Not notes like evidence on a detective show. Just sequence, phrases, moments. The exact shape of conversations before they could be blurred by the next one. Marisol helped more than she knew. I told her about Leah on Tuesday evening in her car outside the clinic after we both got off late. Rain tapped against the windshield while she listened with both hands around a gas station coffee she had forgotten to drink. When I finished, she said, "You know what this sounds like?" I looked at her. "Like he creates the version of you he needs other people to believe in." I turned that sentence over all night. 2 days later, Evan and I went to Denise's house for dinner. She lived in a tidy little place in Crescent Hill with framed travel prints in the hallway and a golden doodle that shed on everything. Under ordinary circumstances, I liked Denise, or at least I had wanted to. She was polished in the same way Evan was polished, but less deliberate about it. She hugged me at the door and held on half a beat too long. "How are you doing?" she asked quietly. I blinked. "Fine." She gave me a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Good. I'm glad." At first, I thought I had imagined it. Then 20 minutes later she handed me a bowl in the kitchen and said in the careful tone people use around breakable things, "If work's been a lot lately, don't feel like you have to stay late tonight." I stared at her. "Why would you say that?" She looked startled. "Oh, no reason. Evan just mentioned you've seemed pretty overwhelmed." The room changed. Not visibly, the same chicken roasting in the oven, the same dog nails ticking across hardwood, the same low music from a speaker on the counter. But something inside the scene locked into place so hard I felt it in my chest. Did he? Denise hesitated. That was all. A tiny pause. But it told me more than a full confession would have. "He worries," she said. "That's all. That's all." The cleanest disguise in the world. I went back into the dining room carrying a salad I could barely feel in my hands. Evan looked up from whatever he was saying to Denise's husband and smiled at me across the table, warm and easy, and socially intact. And in that moment I understood something I should have understood sooner. He had not just been managing me, he had been managing the room around me. The final piece came 3 nights later. We were at home. I'd gone downstairs to get a package from the lobby and came back up quietly, because my sneakers barely made sound on the hallway carpet. The apartment door was cracked open. Evan was on the phone in the kitchen. I heard my name before he knew I was there. "No, she's okay," he was saying in that low, thoughtful voice people trust immediately, just a little more emotional than usual. "Work's been heavy and she gets in her head. I'm keeping an eye on it." I stopped just outside the doorway. A pause. Then he gave a small, reassuring laugh. "No, nothing like that. She just takes things hard sometimes. You know how sensitive she can be. Sensitive. Not cruel. Not outrageous. Not even uncommon. Which was exactly why it hit like a knife. Because he was not reacting to me in a bad moment, he was preparing someone else to read me before I spoke. I stood there with the package in my hands and understood finally that Leah had not given me a suspicion. She had given me a map, and by the time Evan turned and saw me in the doorway, I was no longer wondering whether she had been right. I was wondering how to confront a man who had been narrating me for months without ever once raising his voice. By the time Evan turned and saw me in the doorway, I already knew two things. First, if I spoke to him right, then with his phone still in his hand, and that careful look already assembling itself on his face, I would end up inside his version of the moment before I finished my second sentence. Second, I was done letting him narrate me while I stood there listening. He lowered the phone. Hey, I didn't hear you come in. I looked at him, at the clean kitchen, at the package in my arms, at the life I'd spent a year treating like proof that I had finally chosen well. Clearly, I said. His expression shifted almost invisibly. Not alarm. Assessment. Everything okay? There it was. The opening. The soft invitation to explain myself inside a frame he controlled. I set the package on the counter. I'm tired. I'm going to shower. He watched me for half a second too long, then nodded. Okay. I took the shower. I washed my face. I stood in the bathroom with the fan running and my hands flat on the sink and let the room stop moving. Then I texted Marisol. I know now. I'm talking to him tonight. She called immediately. I answered in a whisper. Do not let him turn it into your tone, she said without hello. Stay on sequence, stay on specifics. Don't argue every branch he offers you. I closed my eyes. I know. No, really. I mean it. You are not going in there to prove you're calm. You're going in there because you already know what's true. That helped more than anything else had. When I came back into the living room, Evan was on the couch with one ankle crossed over his knee, reading something on his laptop. He looked up when I sat across from him in the chair by the window. The room felt overly familiar in that moment. The lamp I had picked from Target because I liked the linen shade. The throw blanket his mother gave us at Christmas. The little dent in the rug where the coffee table leg never sat evenly. Marriage lived in those details. That was the painful part. It had not all been fake. It had just been arranged around a distortion I could finally see. We need to talk, I said. He shut the laptop gently and set it aside. Okay, no defensiveness, no irritation, just openness. Practice. I folded my hands together because I did not want him reading them. I met the woman who approached me outside the pharmacy. He was very still. Her name is Leah. A beat passed, then another. Not long. Long enough. When he answered, his voice was quiet. How did you find her? The question was so revealing it almost made me laugh. Not who is she, not what did she say. Just the root, the management problem. I found her because I looked. He leaned back slightly. Hannah, whatever she told you, I lifted one hand. No. Don't start there. That surprised him. I saw it. I kept my voice even. I'm not here to ask whether you cheated on me. I'm not here to compare stories about your dating life. I'm here because the way she described being with you matches too much of what this marriage has felt like. He held my gaze. What does that mean? You know exactly what it means. His face softened. The concern came down over him like a sheet being pulled straight. I really don't, he said. And I need you to hear how serious this sounds. If someone from my past is reaching out to you and feeding you a version of things, I think we need to slow down and figure out why this is hitting you so hard. There it was. Immediate translation. My reaction before the reality. I felt grief and anger rise together, but this time neither one took over. She didn't feed me anything. She named a pattern I was already living in. Hannah, no. My voice stayed low. You don't get to do that tonight. He sat back, studying me the way people study whether they think they can still predict. I said, you decide what I'm feeling before I say it. You explain my reactions back to me as stress or exhaustion or sensitivity. You correct me in public and call it helping. You turn every conversation about something you did into a conversation about how I'm reacting to it. And when I'm hurt, you get so calm that I end up feeling guilty for being hurt at all. His mouth tightened just slightly. That is not what happens. It is. No, it's what it feels like to you right now. I almost missed it because the sentence came so smoothly, but there it was again. Not reality. My unstable interpretation of it. I nodded once. Exactly. He frowned like I was proving something unfortunate about my own fragility. You've been under a lot of pressure lately. I know you don't like when I say that, but it's true. And now you've had this woman show up and validate the worst possible reading of every ordinary thing in our marriage. Ordinary, I asked. He spread one hand, patient measured. Married people misread each other sometimes. Married people get defensive. Married people step on each other's feelings. That's not the same thing as manipulation. I looked at him for a long moment. Then why did Leah describe your exact phrases? Something flickered across his face. Not panic, not shame, irritation. Small, fast, gone almost immediately. I pressed on. She said you always made her reaction the issue. She said you told other people she was under stress before she could speak for herself. She said apologies with you somehow ended in her comforting you. She said you used concern as cover. I swallowed once. Do you know what hurt the most? Not hearing it from her. Recognizing it before she was done. He exhaled and rubbed a hand over his mouth, a gesture I had once read as emotional strain. Now I saw calculation in the delay. Leah was not well when we were together, he said carefully. I never wanted to talk about that because it felt cruel, but if she's dragging you into this, I may have to be more honest than I wanted. I felt something settle in me then. Heavy. Final. Because that was it, the move. The woman is unstable. The husband is reluctantly concerned. The truth is, whatever he can say most gently. She said you'd do that too, I told him. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. I went on. She said by the time she tried to explain what was happening, your sister already thought she was fragile. Your friends already thought she was exhausting. Sound familiar? He was quiet. I let the silence hold. I was done rescuing him from it. Finally he said, Denise talks too much. That was the nearest thing to a confession he was capable of, and he did not even hear it. I stood up. He looked up at me. Sit down. Not loud. Not forceful. Just automatic. Instruction dressed as calm. I stayed where I was. I'm leaving tonight, I said. His expression changed then, not dramatically, but enough. The softness thinned. You're overreacting. There was the contempt. Barely exposed, but no longer hidden inside concern. Not, you're wrong. Not, let's work through this. Just the old verdict at full speed now that he was losing his grip. I'm reacting exactly enough, I said. Hannah, listen to yourself. No. You listen to me. That stopped him. For the first time since I had known him, I was not speaking to be understood. I was speaking because I already understood. This marriage has required me to doubt my own mind, so you never have to doubt yourself, I said. That's the truth. Not every dinner, not every morning, not every kind thing you ever did. I'm not rewriting the whole year into a cartoon. I'm saying the structure underneath it was built around your need to define reality first. My feelings, my tone, my intentions, my sanity if necessary. I felt my throat tighten, but my voice held. I cannot stay married to someone who needs me uncertain in order to feel in control. He stood up too then. That is not what I need. Maybe not consciously, I said. But it is what you do. He took a step toward me. You are making a huge decision in a heightened state based on a conversation with one person who has every reason to hate me. I picked up the overnight bag I had packed in the bedroom while he was on the couch. I'm making it based on a year of marriage that finally makes sense. His face went still again. Not because he was calm. Because he had run out of entrances. I moved past him into the bedroom. He followed me as far as the doorway. Hannah. I kept pulling open drawers, taking only what I needed. A sweater, jeans, toiletries, phone charger, my work badge from the dish near the lamp. We can talk tomorrow, he said. When you're less activated. I almost laughed then, not because it was funny, but because he truly could not stop. I zipped the bag and looked at him. I am not activated, I said. I am done. He stared at me, and for one clean second the mask dropped completely. What showed underneath was not heartbreak. It was offense. The private arrogance of a man who could not believe his interpretation had finally failed. That was enough. More than enough, Mrs. Porter was opening her door as I stepped into the hallway, like old women who have lived a long time, somehow always know when truth is moving through a building. She took one look at my bag and said, You need a ride. I swallowed hard. I'm going to Marisol's. She nodded once. Good. Evan did not follow me into the hall. That mattered. Not because it was noble, because he knew scenes were not his territory. He worked best in private, in language and slow corrections. Out here he had no clean way to phrase me back into place. Marisol was waiting in her kitchen when I got there, barefoot, hair up, 2 mugs already on the table. I set my bag down and sat in the chair by the window, and for a minute neither of us said anything. Her apartment smelled like coffee and laundry soap and the caldo she had cooked earlier for her son. It was such a normal smell that it nearly undid me. "Well," she asked softly. I looked down at my hands. I left. She nodded like she had been holding that possibility ready for me without ever forcing it. Okay. What I felt then was not triumph. It was grief so specific it almost had texture. Grief for the lamp in our living room, for Sunday groceries, for the version of myself who had thought being carefully tended meant being safe, for the private moments that would never feel fully private again because I now knew how many of them had been engineered toward my doubt. But underneath all of that quiet and unfamiliar was relief, not joy, not peace. Relief. Like my own mind had been holding its breath for months and had finally been allowed to inhale. Later, after Marisol went to bed, I stood alone by her kitchen sink with my mug warming both hands and looked out at the parking lot silvered by the streetlights. Somewhere across the city, Evan was probably still arranging the story in his head. Maybe in other people's heads too. I could not stop that tonight. But I did not need his version anymore. That was the difference. Leah's whisper had felt like a threat when it first found me on the sidewalk. By midnight, standing in another woman's kitchen with my overnight bag by the door, and tomorrow, looking blank and frightening and honest, I understood what it really was. Mercy. Not gentle mercy. Not easy mercy. But the kind that arrives just in time to keep a life from disappearing inside the wrong story. I stood there until the coffee went cool in my hands, watching my reflection faintly overlay the dark glass, and for the first time in a very long time, the face looking back at me felt like mine.